Pat Wallace, good afternoon to you, Pat. Sorry for holding you so long, former head of the National Museum. How are you?
Well, I'm no longer head of the museum. I'm 4 years since
former,
I retired.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, but still always good to hear your dulcet tones on air, Pat. Look, I'm not going to ask you about the good and bad of school banking, but more about metal detectors. This is an issue which came up on the programme yesterday. We had a call from Roscommon about people going in under the dark of night with metal detectors in an archaeological site there in Roscommon, trying to get bits and pieces out of the ground and then selling them off. What do you think of that practice?
Well, I had that yesterday, and I was prompted to phone you, which I did, but too late in the programme as it happened. First of all, Richard Collins is an outstanding citizen, and he's been involved in protecting that site you mentioned as Rindoon. As far as I know, Damien, he's been threatened on that site by metal detectorists. Really? The other thing I wanted to just correct yesterday, apart from a general sort of empathy, and not quite sympathy, but a general empathy with metal detection, which I consider an evil for our heritage and a major threat to the civilization of our ancient past. But the other thing I wanted to correct yesterday was that Mr. Webb was received with the highest courtesy and good manners by my most civilized predecessor, Brandon O'Riordan, when he came here by appointment, be it said. So in 1980, with the Diana Flan Horde. Yeah. So he gave the wrong impression completely, may I respectfully say.
Right, okay, right, but that's fair. That's not
right to say, because I was talking today to somebody who was present in the room when the Webbs came in, and I'm, by the way, delighted to hear that Mr. Webb Senior is still going strong. It's good.
But it was the worst thing. By the way, I mean, did you follow? Of course, you followed that case. But were you aware until yesterday, listening to his son Mike talk about the toll that it took on them?
I didn't actually. I wasn't. But I was in Wood Quay. I was doing all the Wood Quay work at that particular time. So I was out of the building headquarters in Kildare Street.
No, but in general,
I was generally aware, Damien.
Yeah. Were you surprised to hear that? You know, that all they went through because of finding the hoard.
But they took the case. Don't forget. And when you take a case to the Supreme Court, you actually put yourself in the firing line. So that was the unfortunate outcome of that for them. And let it be said, in net cultural terms, we got very good legislation. We have the best anti-metal detecting legislation, monuments legislation in Europe. And that is a wonderful outcome of all of this. We already had our excellent 1930 National Monuments Act, but the 1987 revision, thanks to the discovery of Diana Flan and to the testing in court, has been a wonderful boon to us who are charged with saving our national heritage.
OK, Pat, if I have a metal detector and I go to an archaeological site or a place that I think there may be treasures buried, am I allowed legally to go about digging them up?
Not only that, Damien, you're not, is the short answer to your question. But the other thing is you have to have a license to excavate. Everybody, whoever excavated has to have a license. You also, on top of that, have to have a consent to use the metal detector from the Minister of Arts Heritage. Right. So there's no way you can willy-nilly go around the country with your metal detector.
But why do you say then that they're a nuisance and a menace to archaeology? Are you saying that there are people carrying on regardless?
There are. No, there are people breaking the law, and that's a big threat to our national heritage. And poor old England, our dear old neighbours, their heritage has been destroyed by metal detectors. I'm very familiar with Lincolnshire, and I saw deep ploughing going on there in the 80s. And then you see these kind of metal detecting tables, portable fine scheme, so-called, set up at weekends so that archaeologists and others can pick what's left over. What a disastrous attitude to your own heritage. And the whole southwest, the Celtic part of Britain, has been lost and pilfered. Now, do we want that here in Ireland?
OK, well, let's ask Eugene McGuinness from Kilkenny. Good afternoon, Eugene.
Good afternoon, Damien.
This is a hobby of yours, is that right?
It is, absolutely. And when I hear emotive language like it's an evil and it's this and it's that and the other, I'm absolutely astounded.
Why?
It is.
Can I finish my point, please? You've had enough time there, I think. In the UK, for instance, they have a PAS scheme, which is introduced by the British Museum. I'm sure Pat is aware of it, where anybody who finds anything of any archaeological interest, or it doesn't have to be a treasure, anything, is obliged to. It's not obliged to, but they can ring the museum and they can log that find. And as a consequence of that, they have a really good idea of where all these finds are, and they can extrapolate various bits and pieces from that. But the fact is that I have a metal detector. I'll have to correct Pat. You can actually metal detect in Ireland. What you cannot do is metal detect for anything of any archaeological value. Now, the problem about that is that I can go onto a greenfield site. When I was metal detecting, I went to friends of mine, farmers, onto their land. There was no notion of any architectural or historical significance to the land. And if I found something with my metal detector, dug a small hole to find that, if I dug up, for instance, a half crown, I hadn't got a problem. If I dug up something that was of interest to the archaeological crowd, well, then I broke the law. Now,
it's not the archaeological crowd, it's the interest of the state and the property of the state. It's not a fun thing here. We're talking about the property of the state.
Just hold on, Eugene. Let Pat respond there. Go ahead, Pat, and then I'll come back to you, Eugene.
We're talking about the heritage of the Irish people here. This is not a game where you can dig as you please and have great fun. We're talking about the net property of the Irish people here, our heritage. This is like a hobby where you go into the National Library at weekends and, burn a few papers belong to Tom Clark.
There's more rubbish emotive language. If I just
I didn't call you rubbish. You may be off the wall and you may be breaking the law, but I wouldn't call you rubbish.
I'm not breaking the law. I am absolutely not breaking the law.
Big time.
Let me tell you something, Pat. The very fields that I dug in all those years ago, I don't do it now. You would never have looked in them because they had no archaeological or historical interest.
Did you find anything in them, Eugene?
How do you know that? How do you know that? How on earth do you know that? With all the infrared, all the aerial photography, all the means of detecting from the air that we now have.
You still
how
can't
do you know
find
I
it.
wouldn't have checked?
The fact is that 90% of all the archaeological finds in the UK are found by people with metal detectors. Now, let me say this. Michael Lewis, who I'm sure you're familiar with, he was the deputy head of the Portable Antiquities and Treasures of the British Museum. And he calls metal detecting over there, he calls it land fishing. He said, and he's quoted as saying, that it encourages treasure hunters to adopt best practice because they report their finds.
Well, Eugene,
have you... As a consequence, all those finds stay in the UK.
I know the way the UK, which has said goodbye to so much of its heritage, is being cited here as the way of protecting, the way forward.
We're talking about the head of the British Museum here now.
Okay, Eugene, by the way, can I just ask you...
I'm very familiar with the British Museum and their publications.
Well, I'm glad you are. Well, then you should read up a little bit more about it. Sorry.
Okay, can I just ask you, Eugene, what is the attraction for you of metal detecting?
I tell you, Damien, what it started as. I have great interest in any of the archaeological finds. I visit museums on a regular basis, but that was not why I started. I got a present of a metal detector, and on a Sunday afternoon, I would go out with the kids and just in a nondescript field, friends of mine, and I would just metal detect.
And have you ever found anything of archaeological significance?
Well, if I had, I couldn't say it on air, but in actual fact, I haven't, because where I was, Damien, there was nothing. There was only pennies and half crowns. But the problem about it that I discovered, and having visited various fairs and various displays, etc., that because of agriculture in this country and because of our fertilizer, a lot of the coins, the old copper coins, have been corroded to the extent that you won't recognise them in 20 years' time. And if I didn't find that coin, you're quite right, Pat. You possibly could have found the coin, but I think it's unlikely, based on the funding that they receive, that they're going to check every green field in Ireland. And rather than demonise the people who use metal detectors, you should do as the UK have done and embrace it. The fact is that 90% of their finds are found by people using metal detectors and are now sitting in their museum.
Let Pat respond to that then. You made that point, but you made that point already. Go ahead, Pat, yeah?
Yeah, no, 90% of finds in the UK may be made by metal detectors. Our proportion wouldn't be nearly as high as that, thanks to our excellent laws. And don't use the phrase, please, nondescript field. Every field is sacred in terms of the National Monuments Act, and every field deserves protection, analysis, and seeking the permission. Please dignify our state by applying for permission to the Minister, both for a consent form and for a licence to excavate, instead of digging holes here and there.
Okay. But how do you know, Pat, unless you dig? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean, can I tell you, Damien, the danger of digging if you're not a professional archaeologist? You take the object out of its context. Some objects are found with objects that will date them, say a piece of wood which you can cut rings through and get a date for. Other objects will tell you what they were by reference to the object they were torn away from. For instance, there's a story here of a leather satchel. A satchel of the early Christian period, which was left in the ground by the metal detector person, and a metal object was dragged away from it. Okay. So we've lost the context. The mutual dating and contextual and cultural references are destroyed in that kind of violent transaction.
That may be the case, but the fact is that most of the coins
don't
that
just
are found
gloss over it like that. That may be the case.
Can I finish? Can I finish, please?
Very quickly, Eugene.
Yes, okay. Most of what was found is found on the top layer of soil. The fact is that I go with a metal detector. It only goes down about 15 inches anyway. But what damage does a farmer do when he pulls the plough through that field?
Okay, stay with me.
The farmer, of course, is on his legitimate everyday business with his plough behind him. But a person going in with the intention of digging up something from the past, or even making a few bob from the proceeds, is certainly on a different mission.
Will you stay with me there, Pat? Stay with me, Eugene. Of Helen and Christer want to know Driscoll's in Limerick. Helen, metal detectors, your point.
My point is to Pat Wallace. I think he's brilliant. I'm mad about him. But I have to say that he's completely wrong on this.
Why?
Because the same thing happened in England, and there's been stealing going on in Ireland for the last 25 years. But it's going on by other people who are coming into Ireland. They're taking things, they're taking it out, it's been sold on the net. Pat Wallace has an entire army of people who would be willing to, who love the country, who would go to any goddess station, any archaeologist, any history place and say, this is what I found. Is there something here? You should check it out.
So you're saying, Helen, the majority of people that have metal detectors and go around looking for treasures like this, they're not doing it for financial gain, are they?
Not the one in Ireland. The people that are coming in it's a business, and they come in and they do it. They have a name. They're called Nighthawk.
Okay, and they are people that come in, forage, and then go across the border to the north.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Christer is in Dublin 6. Christer, you're a former employee of the National Museum. Go ahead. Your point.
There was I don't think he can uninvent metal detectors, and I think that family found the Derna hoard.
The webs
were treated pretty appallingly.
Yeah. Well, Pat says not. No, but that's a matter of opinion. But go on anyway.
Well, when you think about it, in the UK, they have a way of rewarding people for taking an interest in this. Whereas in Ireland, it seems like everything else, actually, the whole guidance of the thing and the competence of it is held in too few hands.
Yeah, just
so
on that, Pat, just the phrase was used earlier on, land fishing. If there were proper rules and regulations brought in where it said if you find something you must document it, or like if the webs,
Damien, they're land fishing for your heritage. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, but you see, if the Webbs hadn't got their metal detector down on that island in Tipperary, they'd never have found the Derry na Flan.
Exactly.
Chalice.
Yeah, could I make a point on that?
Yeah.
We never wanted the Derry na Flan necessarily to come up in our lifetimes. We're in no hurry with new finds. I'm now nearly 68 years of age. Brilliant finds will be made after my lifetime. I'm in no hurry to see those before I die. All I want is that what's in the ground is safe in the ground and will be scientifically dealt with and recovered from the ground in the generations to come.
But is the Derrynaflan hoard in Challis better in the ground than in the National Museum?
No, it's not. Now that it's out of the ground and conserved brilliantly, it's better in the National Museum.
Yeah, and it was found by a metal detector.
When it was yanked from the ground. Why did it have
there
to
you go again, Damien.
Yes,
using
Eugene.
those terms, yanked from the ground.
Yes,
That's dreadful to speak about those people like that. You have no idea what way they took that from the ground, whether they took it and they were very careful about the way they brought it up. Yanked from the ground is typical emotive language used. It shouldn't be used.
Could I ask Mr. Wallace?
All right, okay. Well, we're not going to get agreement on that, but I appreciate your comments and your views and opinions, and there's support for both sides on this, the nuisance and the scourge of metal detecting.
But remember, the law is more important than opinions here.
Okay.
Mr. Wallace.
It is, but you have the law wrong as well, Pat.
Okay, look at listen. We leave it there. It's a matter of opinion. Christopher, sorry I can't get back to you. Helen, Pat, and Eugene, thank you all indeed for that discussion this afternoon. The programme today was produced by the series producer Angus McAnally, researched by Simon Gallagher. Nikki Dempsey was on sound. Laura Lee Davis was our broadcast coordinator, and Ray Darcy is up next.